Happy gaming, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Irreverent Reverend, and this is part 2 of our beginner's guide to Astroneer. If you are a new player and you haven't seen part 1, I encourage you to check it out. You'll see a link for it up in the top right corner. But if you've already watched that, or if you just feel like you are ready for part 2 of the guide, then you are in the right place. As always, I do strive to be spoiler-free, so know that we're not going to be revealing a whole lot of secrets or things that you can discover on your own. We're just going to dig a little bit deeper into some tips and tricks and ways for you to have a great time in this game. So, without further ado, let's head back to our starter base on Silva and get started. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about in this guide is planning for progression. And I want to be clear, though, I'm not here to tell you that this is the way that you must progress. I'm not even going to tell you this is what I think the best way is to progress. Because remember, this is a sandbox game. It is here for you to enjoy however you see fit. So there is no right way to progress. But I do think there are a few things that if you keep them in mind that will save you headaches as you continue in this game. And the first of those is bites. And in the first guide, we talked about research and gaining bites so that you could unlock new items to produce them. So say, for example, you're doing a guide and you need to create a drill mod for a little bit later in the guide. Well, you need to remember, I need 1,000 bites to unlock that, like so. And so if you are just keeping your research going and making sure that you have enough and planning ahead for the things that you want to unlock, that can be a way for you to stay on top of it. Remember, also in the Astropedia are all these guides, and now I want to look at these planet guides because we are here on Silva, the starter planet, and you can see that the difficulty was easy. But if we look ahead to Visania, this is a medium difficulty. And so just a reminder that as planets increase in difficulty, you will also get more for research samples and research items that you gather there. Remember also that the deeper you go on a planet, the more you will get for those items as well. So stay on top of that because it takes, as of the most recent patch, 284,050 bytes to unlock all items. So you are going to be doing some research. So stay on top of it, keep collecting things, keep researching things, and you'll do just fine. The second thing to keep in mind are resources. As we look at Glacio as an example, remember that not all resources are on every planet. So if you want titanium, if you want iron, which is refined from hematite, if you want the gas argon, you're not going to find it on Silva. And so plan ahead, look ahead. Do you want to build something and you need iron? Know that you're going to need to travel for that. And as you go looking for them, also note that primary resources are always found underground and secondary resources are always found on the surface. That'll help you find them that much faster. And the last thing to keep in mind as you are planning for your progression is power. And we'll talk about power management for your bases a bit later in this guide. But when you're thinking about even setting up an outpost on a planet like Atrox, note that power there is a little bit different. The sun is low, the wind is low. So you need to plan ahead for what generation of power you can count on, and it certainly isn't solar or wind on Atrox. And that'll go a long way to avoid the headache and frustration of a very low power base as you progress in the game. The next thing we want to cover in this guide is terraforming and the terrain tool. And we talked a bit about the terrain tool in part 1 of this guide, essentially it being a means of gathering resources. And it certainly is that. But it also is a tool that can help us get around. We can also mod and augment it for it to act a little bit differently. So let's take a look at how some of that might work. But we'll start with the simplest point. We're going to need some copper. So let's start gathering copper. But notice my cursor comes over the mountain, over this harder terrain. I see some sparks. It's digging a little bit slower. And so that is just letting us know that, well, the terrain tool is just not sufficient on its own, but we have the option of creating a drill mod. Now, I unlocked this a bit earlier. It's 1,000 bytes to do, and as you see, it takes one piece of ceramic and is printed with our backpack printer. But once it's printed, we can take it, we can connect it directly to our terrain tool, and you see the green light underneath it letting us know that it is connected and operative. And we can simply begin to utilize our terrain tools we were before, but with the drill mod, you can see that it is going down much faster, gathering much faster. You'll also note that it is taking power from our backpack now because we have added this mod, but man, is it doing a big difference for helping us gather copper that much faster. All right, so we've gotten the copper we need, and that's an idea of how the drill mods work. Note that as planets progress in difficulty, you will have not just places that will go slower if you don't have a drill mod, but some places you won't be able to drill at all, and places that just by digging deeper into a planet, the same deal. So some places it'll help you go faster, and some places you won't be able to drill without a drill mod. All right, let's let this malachite smelt down to some copper, because we need to head underground. Underground, where it is pretty dark, which is why we gathered the copper to make this work light, so you could actually see what we're doing down here, but also underground so that we could find some aluminum. Aluminum which will help us to print some of the things that we're going to use later in this guide. And as I start heading down this tunnel, you can see in the distance that's aluminum. That's what we want, but we don't have a natural way of getting there. So this is where the terrain tool can come in really handy to help us get places. The flatten mode is pulled up by pressing Control, and whatever angle it is on as you begin utilizing it, it will either flatten the terrain that you are mousing over, or if there is no terrain, it will add terrain to it. Now remember that it is using the soil from your soil canister, so you need to have one of those in your backpack as you're doing that. And also, you can always adjust the angle of the ramp that you're on. We've started with a sort of very simple angle, and it's almost going to take too long to get down there. So here what I'm doing is just making a little bit more of an extreme angle just to get us down there. It's still totally traversable, but just creating this ramp helps us to get down to the spot so that we can actually gather up this aluminum, which is what we want and what we need. And just note that even unmodded, these are the things that your terrain tool can do. There's also the add terrain mode, which will add terrain, again using the soil from your soil canister. The flatten mode will take whatever angle you begin at and flatten that is there. And then of course the default mode will just pull up the soil and any resources that are with it, which is the excavate mode. So that we're just going to gather up some more aluminum here, and then let's take a look at some more of the mods that we can utilize on the terrain tool. And before we dig into, well, let's call them the optional augments of the terrain tool, it's worth noting that the drill mod 1 that we talked about earlier is one of 3, and that as you progress to more difficult planets or even deeper into some of the other planets, there will be places where you will need the higher level drill mod. So be aware of that as you go. But this is the inhibitor mod, and as it says, it prevents terrain deformation. And what that means is it changes the default activity of the excavate mode. As you can see, I'm not actually altering the terrain. Now I am collecting surface level resources still, so we'll do that. But if you ever come across a spot and you like the way the terrain looks and you just don't want to dig it up, the inhibitor mod will in fact inhibit you from doing so. The next augment that we'll look at here, or the mod, is the alignment mod. And the behavior this changes is, instead of working from whatever angle you begin digging or adding or flattening, it's working relative to the core of the planet. So you can see when I dig, I'm digging straight down. When I add terrain, I'm adding straight up. And when I use the flatten mode, I'm actually creating a vertical wall relative to the angle I begin and the core of the planet. Or I can use the flatten mode directly underneath my Astroneer and create a bit of a flat spot for me. And this is a great way to create flat spaces for your base. And if you're interested in learning more about that, I've got a guide for that explicitly, and that you'll see up in the top right corner now. But we also want to talk about how we can combine mods. Note that I have here this narrow mod. I'm going to add that. I'm also going to add the boost mod to my terrain tool, which increases the speed. And I'm still using the alignment mod, but with the narrow mod, you'll see that as I dig down, it's just a smaller hole. And as I build up, it is a smaller column. And so that's just an idea of what happens as you sort of combine some of these mods. Now, they do take more power as you add multiple mods together, but totally manageable and can be a lot of fun. And speaking of fun, this is the terrain analyzer there in the bottom right of my backpack. You'll see that it has a bit of a purple hue to it, and that's because after I created the terrain mod, I did what it's built for, which is I went and found a color that I liked. And I thought, well, you know, let's go with the purple from the forest spaces over there, and I just dug up a lot of purple. But now I combine that with the inhibitor mod, and I can paint. I can paint with that purple. So if you find a color that you like, and maybe you just want to make all your base that color, take your analyzer mod, go get that color, grab the inhibitor mod, and paint to your heart's delight. Now the next thing we'll talk about is power. And power is pretty straightforward for the most part in this game. Everything that is connected and through the platforms throughout your base, and you can see these cable plugs and the pulsing yellow lines between them. That's letting us know that these are all connected and they are all sharing evenly the power that is being produced. But that also means that we're going to need more power as we go than even our shelter can give us. So let's talk about power generation. Earlier we used this small generator, and so you know that by adding a piece of organic to it, connecting it to our base and turning it on will provide more power to our base. And that's helpful. There's also this medium generator which uses carbon, which is refined organic, to add even more power to our base. But if you're like me, using the generators is not ideal because you've got to keep feeding them resources and they run out over time. And so I prefer often to use these renewable resources, the wind and the solar options, which of course come on as you see the wind is blowing through or when the sun is out. And so we just take all these different generators and we connect them directly to our base. And that is, again, adding power to it. These tier 1, the smaller items, we can connect directly as well, but notice that these smaller items do create their own platforms when you just place them on the ground. So especially early on when you don't have a whole lot of storage space or platform space, just setting them on the ground and connecting them with another cable plug can be a great way to add power to your base. Note also that, of course, when the sun's not out, solar's not adding. And when the wind isn't blowing, we're not getting power. So you also want to utilize batteries. Batteries are a huge boon to your power management at your base. Connecting those again in the same way, just having them connected to a platform on your base, means that when you do not have enough power to run your items, the batteries will deplete. And when you have excess power, they'll recharge. There's also this power cell item, which is a consumable item, which works the same as the batteries in the sense of depleting. But of course, when it runs out, you can't recharge it. It simply disappears because it, as I said, is consumable. But let's say, for example, that we have got a couple of things running here, and we've got the smelting furnace running, and we've got the research chamber going, and you can see that the battery is depleting, it's using up some of its power, and you can also see that we just don't have enough power for everything to run at full speed. So there's one other thing that's really worth noting, even early game power management, and that's utilizing this great tool called extenders. And extenders are this thing right in front of my Astroneer here. And we're going to go ahead and just pick those up. And note also that they go right into our widget slot because that was open in our backpack, which will enable us to drop them as we're using them, just holding out the cable plug in a moment. But essentially, our goal here is to deprioritize the research chamber on our base. So because if we're producing lots of things through the smelting furnace or a printer, we want the power to go there first. So we just hold out the cable plug, use the widget key, C or V, and then use the extender to connect the research chamber to the rest of our base. And now notice that all of the power we are producing is going to the smelting furnace, but because there isn't enough power to run the smelting furnace, the research chamber is taking a break basically. Now if we add enough power for the smelting furnace to get full power and for there to be some left over, then the research chamber will start back up again. So notice I dropped the battery down. There's enough power for that. Well, we actually ran out of space for the smelting furnace to put its completed items, so it stopped. But this is a really helpful way to deprioritize portions of your base. Just connecting them with an extender means that power will only go there if you have sufficient power to run everything else first. And that can be a helpful way just to avoid bottlenecks with your power management at your base. And something I just want to show you and for you to be thinking about is that you can do a whole lot of power generation just by searching the world and finding things. In fact, if you see here, I've got a line of solar and wind tier 1 generation, and then we're going to jump down here and you'll see I've got all sorts of tier 2 generation, the medium-sized ones, and I found every single piece of power generation you see here just from exploring the world. And this is powering in another one of my saves, an early base. Now I did create the medium batteries, and I'm going to say something about batteries here in a minute, but note that all of these, which is producing a significant amount of power, are things that I've just found. So doing some exploration, and we're going to talk about vehicles in a moment, is a great way to maintain, manage, and produce power early in the game. And then later in the game, there's one more generator that you'll probably take advantage of, and that is the RTG. And I say late game because there is a significant cost of bytes to unlock it and resources to print it, but once you can, it's a super helpful generator. Primarily because, well, for starters, it doesn't require fuel. I mean, I couldn't put organic onto it if I wanted to, as you can see. but also that it's not reliant on the wind or the sun. It is simply producing a consistent flow of power, and that makes it a very reliable source of power for your base. But just note that until you can make the RTGs, wind and solar are totally viable options as long as you have a decent battery bank. Batteries connected to your base that are charging when you have excess power, and they're allowing your base to pull from them when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing. But it's also worth noting about the batteries, the medium battery is great. You saw I use it. That was more of an aesthetic choice, but they work well. They hold 256 units of power, though. Note that a medium silo full of small batteries, 24 to be precise, actually holds 3 times as much power at 768 units. But however you do it, though, just make sure you've got some batteries attached to your base, and that will undergird your power production early in the game. And the next thing we want to talk about are land vehicles. Land vehicles will enable you to get around the planet super easily, and we're going to see why and what each of these vehicles, what's unique about them, and when you can get hold of them and utilize them. The first is the tractor and trailer. Now this will require 1,000 bytes to unlock the tractor and 1,500 to unlock the trailer, and they both do require aluminum, so once you have the smelting furnace, you can go ahead and make these, and I would recommend you doing so. A nice thing is the tractor does have its own seat. You'll see in a moment that's unique to the tractor, but once you print it, the next thing you're going to need to do is actually charge it up. All of these vehicles require power to operate, but you can also see that it does have some storage in there, so we attach a battery, it charges it up, also putting a little power generation on there, and you're going to be fine. You connect the trailers to it with that cable plug there, and you can connect a total of 3, and you can pull it there. The trailers don't have power storage, but you can put things on them like this. So again, you're going to create like a train of them, and you can travel around and pick things up and bring them back to your base. And so it's super helpful. Also super helpful is you can see I'm actually tethered to the tractor, and so all of the vehicles will provide your Astroneer with oxygen, so you can travel all around and not worry about where that's coming from. And it's worth noting, though, that it does not push oxygen down a tether line. You can see here if I drop a tether, it's not actually going to connect to it unless you attach an oxygenator to your vehicle. But one of the best things about vehicles is the ability to travel all around the world and to have a consistent source of oxygen, so that's helpful. The next vehicle we'll look at here is the buggy. And you can see as we mouse over it, it is, as it says, suitable for scouting class activities. And I say that's because, well, there's really no storage on it. Now you can see I could actually put that medium storage there, but that's not going to help us because we actually do need to put a rover seat there. Much like the tractor and all the other vehicles, you do need to provide it with power. The buggy does have an internal power storage, which holds 4 units just like the tractor, but note that there's no storage on this bad boy. This is sort of like a fun vehicle. You can go all over the place on it, but just note that other than your backpack, there's no storage that you can bring anything back with. But it can be a really handy vehicle to get around, maybe pick up some research, or just to explore the planet you're on. The next vehicle we'll look at is the medium rover. The medium rover is going to be something a little bit later in the game because it requires the chemistry lab to make because of the rubber and plastic materials, but it has a lot more storage and also has a little bit more flexibility in how you have it all set up. It does require power, again, just like all of the vehicles, but we also need to add a seat to it, and then we can hop in it and just drive around. Like the tractor and trailers, you can train several cars. It will hold 4 cars. Now that they're all medium rovers, so they'll all look the same. And you can even add a drill to the front of it, which is really handy if you're getting around and you come to a mountain. Well, instead of going around it, you can just go through it. That's going to take a little bit more power, but it's worth it, and it can be handy. And of course, you can carry a whole lot more on the medium rover than you can on the tractor and trailer, and certainly than the buggy. And the last one we'll look at, certainly not least, is the large rover. It's a lot like the medium rover, only larger, and so take everything up a notch and you've got the large rover. A few extra wheels, takes a little bit more power to get around in, but also stores a whole lot more. So you can pop that rover seat wherever you want. Again, just like all vehicles, you do need to provide it some power. This one has a lot more storage, 16 units of power on each car, but once you have that going, you should be fine. But look how much it'll carry. You can move bases with this with ease, or just do long explorations and finding all sorts of things. But even better than storing another large rover is when you chain them together. Just like most of the others, you can have 4 cars together to get around, and each of them will hold their own stuff. And don't neglect the front and rear storage, which is super handy when you're getting around. Now, you'll lose the front and rear storage whenever cars are connected like this. Now, I still have the full rear and the front, but of course I can't put anything between the 2 cars. You also, on the front, can add the drill just like the medium rover, and a paver. And the paver is super helpful because not only can the drill help you go through things, but the paver will help you go over them or create nice flat roads where you're going. So the large rover is just frankly pretty fun to drive around. That circle you see there is the heads-up display for the paver, and you'll get used to that as you get around. But this is a great vehicle. Really, all of them are fun and super helpful as you're exploring, gathering, all that stuff. So take advantage of these land vehicles as you progress in the game. And so to utilize them, let's talk about navigation, or maybe more aptly named, don't get lost. You see, as you take this vehicle out into the world to find some power generation or some resources, or just to explore, as we go further and further away from our base, we do want to make sure that we can get back. Because these planets are large, we have stuff to do, but we always want to get back to our base. And so what you want to do is keep an eye on the beacon, but obviously you're going to hit a point where it's not going to be viewable because of the horizon. I mean, you are on a planet, it's a sphere, you're not going to be able to see the beacon on the other side. So you can, with a piece of quartz in your backpack printer, print a beacon. And a beacon is a simple device that will create another one of those indicators. And as long as you are placing them down so that you can see one from the other, you can create paths to get back to where you came from. But I have to say, it can get a bit tedious to do that a whole lot. So notice that we're headed north here, and I want to give you a tip that will save you a lot of time and potentially headaches when it comes to navigating on planets. And that is simply head north. And especially on Silva, the starter planet, because you always begin in the northern hemisphere, which means you are closer to the North Pole than the south. But specifically what I mean is, if you create and mark a path with beacons from your base to the North Pole, then you will always have an easily accessible path back to your base. So no matter where you are on the planet, if you head north and follow that path, you will end up at the North Pole. And if you can do that, and you have a path from the North Pole back to your base, then no matter where you are, no matter what you've been up to, no matter how disoriented you are relative to where your base is, you'll always be able to get back simply by going to the North Pole and then following your marked path back. You can see in the distance there, that is the North Pole. We're not going to talk about gates in this part of the guide, but that is a place that, again, you can always find simply by heading north and then following the beacons back to your base. All right, my friends, that is going to do it for part 2 of our beginner's guide to Astroneer. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something, and I hope that you'll come back and join us for other videos, especially part 3 of this beginner's guide, in which we'll cover leaving the planet for others, gathering resources without actually going out gathering, maximizing storage, and even taking a look at some automation. So I hope that you'll come back and join us as we continue to explore getting started in this game. Take care. Bye-bye.